Although rock music from the US and UK is well recorded, and the social impact that it made on the Western world is heavily documented, shockingly little is known about the various other rock movements that occurred around the world at the same time. In the late 60s and early 70s, as the hippie era of the West was coming to a close, a second 60s was in full swing. In Zimbabwe, the hard-hitting chords of bands like Wells Fargo and IQ protested the recent assembly of an oppressive government. In Nigeria, Afro-rock bands like the Hikers and the Funkies proved to heal a nation after the violence and destruction of a civil war. The rock movement of the 60s and 70s has long been associated with music of youth, rebellion, and social change. Marked by a period of political unrest and stark generational discontinuities, rock music served as a flashpoint for dilemmas of citizenship and civil society. It is perhaps no surprise, then, that African rock emerged shortly after the 60s, when nearly 40 countries were decolonized within a 10-year frame. These newly formed countries were faced with the monumental task of building a nation that meshed divided multi-ethnic, multicultural, and multi-religious cartographic conceptions created by colonialism into nation-states. By analyzing both the formation and musical content of rock music from Zambia during the 60s and 70s, I argue that Zamrock is a direct result of colonialization and the need to construct a new national identity. To put things bluntly, the effects of British colonialism in northern Rhodesia, what is now Zambia, would later prove to be absolutely essential in the creation of Zamrock. Colonialism in northern Rhodesia had an exceptionally paradoxical effect on Zambia. On the one hand, it created an exceptionally stratified country that marginalized certain ethnicities and imposed Western culture on Zambian natives. On the other hand, it created the ideal social dynamic and the necessary infrastructure for a musical revolution to occur. The language consolidation efforts of colonialism is one such example of this. Prior to colonialism, Zambia consisted of nearly 50 dialects. However, when the British first colonized northern Rhodesia in an attempt to maximize colonial administration practices, they made a concerted effort to consolidate the various dialects in the region. In 1927, Bembe, Nyana, Tonga, Lozi, and English were chosen to be the principal languages of instruction in African schools in Zambia. The missionary activity and educational policies of colonialism in northern Rhodesia played a crucial role in the formation of Zamrock on two fronts. Firstly, it introduced Zambians to Western music for the first time. Perhaps more importantly, the language consolidation efforts played a crucial role in the choice to make English the national language of Zambia after it gained independence. Perhaps the most significant colonial development, however, that contributed to the creation of Zamrock was the introduction of the radio. In 1940, the Central African Broadcasting Station, or CABS, was established in Lukasa. Driven by the colonial administration's need to control information, CABS brought war news to African miners in the volatile Copper Belt. Copper was vital to the war effort, and Northern Rhodesian administration wished to ensure that its production was not disrupted. However, radio technology in Northern Rhodesia during the war remained fairly primitive, as wired radios were the only accessible radio in the country. As a result, the radio and the information that accompanied it remained endemic to Lukasa and the southern Copper Belt region. However, that all changed in 1945 with the introduction of the Saucepan Special, an inexpensive battery-powered radio affectionately named after its resemblance to a cooking pot. The Saucepan Special enabled information to be disseminated amongst all regions of northern Rhodesia. The receiver was strong enough to capture airwaves from BBC, Voices of America, and Voices of Kenya. Radio thus opened the region to the world and exposed the average Zambian to more new musical styles. By the 1960s, the same radio stations that were set up by colonialists began broadcasting psychedelic rock music from the West, strife with anti-establishment lyrics to the Zambian populace. When Zambia finally gained independence in 1964, the country and its people not only experienced the dramatic changes commonly associated with independence, but also faced with the monumental task of reconciling the problems created from their colonial past. As a result, all of the necessary ingredients for rock music to be made were present. It was now up to the country to stir up the pot and start cooking. By the mid-60s, rock music from a varied bunch, Elvis Presley, Jimi Hendrix, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, along with soul and funk music from the likes of James Brown and Otis Redding, had captured the interest of Zambia's newly liberated African youth. This new generation of African Zambians, educated in the Western system and engaged in world news, identified with the cultural revolution that was going on in the West and wanted to join in on the dialogue. Black Zambian groups like the Rav5, Lukasa Beatles, the Black Evening Follies began to appear around Lukasa and the Copperbelt. The formative years of Zambian rock music was well underway. However, at this stage in Zambia's musical development, blatant cultural imperialistic overtones were present. The new Zambian musicians fashioned their music and style to imitate that of their Western idols. The Lukasa Beatles were a local version of the Fab Four. The Rav5 modeled their nicknames after the band members of the Rolling Stones. Even the dress, bell-bottom jeans, and high-heeled boots of the hippie scene directly imitated the West. But although the formative years of Zambian independence and its emerging music scene showed a desire from the Zambian people to engage in larger social and cultural narrative of the world, it also highlighted a lacking national identity. This is reflected in the obvious Western mimicry of Zambian popular music and culture of the era. However, Zambia's first president, Kenneth Kaunda, recognized this problem and attacked it head-on. Aside from Zamrock musicians themselves, Kenneth Kaunda is perhaps the most influential figure in not only the development of Zamrock, but also connecting the music to Zambia's national identity. In a dramatic effort to break away from Zambia's deep cultural malaisance of the past, in 1967, President Kaunda and his government announced the national identity of Zambia. Humanism. Humanism is a quasi-socialist political and social philosophy that draws from Christian, socialist, and democratic modes of thought. In short, humanism rejects Western values and reasserts traditional communal ones. A former Zambian folk music himself, President Kaunda recognized the mobilizing powers that music possesses, and in a bold move, ordered 90% of all music to be played on the radio to be that of Zambian origin. Although his new policy was met with much resistance amongst Western rock enthusiasts, it enabled Zamrock to flourish and evolve into a truly unique sound. In order to keep up with the demand in the new content, a Zambian record company was created in 1971 called the Zambia Music Parlor Limited. Within a few years, the same group of Zambian musicians that once played covers of Western rock songs were now at the forefront of a thriving musical movement. Fueled by the population's insatiable appetite for Western rock, but restricted by the government's censorship laws, these musicians turned inward to draw inspiration for their music. Themes in national issues like the independence struggle, unity, and self-reliance quickly became commonplace in Zamrock music. Chrissy Zebitembo's I'm Not Made of Iron, for example, addresses the copper mining industry that had a death grip on the majority of the Zambian workforce. When Zambia experienced a food security issue as a result of the misappropriation of labor in the mid-70s, Zamrock songs like Starving Child by Musi Otunyo came out, urging the population to take part in an agrarian revolution. Even the names of Zambian rock bands of the past, which mimic the rock ensembles from the West, were replaced with new names that more accurately reflected their Zambian heritage. Amanas, for example, stands for Ask Me About Nice Artists in Zambia. Musi Otunyo, on the other hand, is a Tongan phrase that translates to the smoke that thunders, and is the indigenous name for Zambia's Victoria Falls. Music is an essential part of all human cultures, as it brings people together and enables social issues to be addressed in a relatively sensitive manner. Furthermore, music can be an indispensable tool in analyzing the factors that define a culture, as it has a reflective quality that points out the various problems that culture faced at the time the music was made. Having said this, music is pervasive and that it has no borders, and new meaning can be extrapolated from almost anyone, regardless of the language or social barriers. Zamrock is a testament to these assertions, as the development of Zamrock not only reflects the development of a country, but also the development of a national identity and the various problems associated with the journey.